This story takes place in November of 2017. I was 18, and I'm a very short girl, only 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way to suggest that they might not like me. So needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. My friend and I were out shopping. It was something we do maybe every few months, just to bond since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. And she's just like me, barely scraped 5'1", and very non-confrontational. It's probably why we became friends. On every shopping trip, we would find ourselves in Ann Summers. We were both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere used, and Ann Summers always had great sales, so we'd grab at the cheap bras while we could. This shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers. But that's when things took a bit of a turn. I barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me. Her finger jammed into my chest. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. Assuming she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "Oh, I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. It should have been obvious to me at that time. No salesperson would behave like that. Well, not one that wanted to keep their job anyway. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes that she wouldn't notice me again. She didn't, and I thought that I was in the clear. My friend and I browsed the shop trying to avoid the woman, but the shop wasn't very big, probably only 15 feet by about 18 feet. So eventually, I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. I was looking at the price tags, but realized that I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. It's important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans. You'd think that she may have a child in this pushchair, but no, it was full of plastic carrier bags. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double bagged and tied shut. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. The sense of protection became very relevant because when I leant over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair, was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently this was too close. This woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around it to where I stood. She hit me in the face. It was somewhere between a slap and a punch, and I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. All I knew is that it hurt. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear. I apologized to her. This woman just hit me, and I apologized to her. I regret it now, but at that time, I didn't want to provoke her any further. Not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. In shock, I turned around and ran to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. I stood there, holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, She hit me. She just hit me," to my friend. We stood there for a good minute in silence, and my friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. "She's gone," my friend told me. I let out a breath that I didn't know I was holding. Can we stay in here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The front of the store was open, but she could have easily just a couple of feet down the road and out of sight, waiting for me to leave. My friend agreed, and we slowly browsed the shop again. About 5 minutes later, we got to the counter to check out. The girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. "That woman had been in here for 30 minutes. I didn't know what to do," she told the two of us. What did she say to you?" "She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in, and then she hit me because I was too close to her," I told her. "She hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. "If I had known that, I would have called security. I am so sorry." I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She didn't look much older like I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. Still shaken up, my friend and I made our way out of the store. I looked around but didn't see the woman. "Can we go home now?" I asked my friend. We hadn't finished browsing all of the shops, but I was so paranoid that we'd bump into the woman again. She agreed, and we got the bus home. When I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police. I called the non-emergency line, and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" Unless I went back to the Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had. They wouldn't do anything. It's been just over 3 years, and now I'm sure that woman was likely to have been homeless or on drugs. It's the only explanation I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or both. So, to the possibly homeless, possibly drugged up woman who hit me, I hope that the current state of the world is treating you well, and that you're finally getting the personal space you wanted. But let's not meet again.
Okay, this is my first time posting on Reddit, but please bear with me. In 4th grade, I had a best friend named Jenny, not her real name, and every day after school we would hang out. It was awesome because Jenny was actually neighbors with my grandmother, and every day I would go to my grandmother's house after school. We had many after-school adventures and would either hang out at her house or in front in my grandma's yard. My grandmother and Jenny both lived at the end of the street. It was a dead end. It was great because all the neighbors knew each other, and it was often you would see children casually playing in the street, as my cousins also lived on this street, but not important. This neighborhood was and still is very nice, quiet, safe, and comfortable. One day after school, I was alone at my grandmother's house when I saw an unfamiliar car pull up to one of my grandma's neighbor's house. It immediately took me off guard as I hadn't seen this vehicle before. I went out into my grandmother's front yard when I saw 2 men get out and approach the neighbor's home. I was very confused and concerned, as I have never seen these men before, and because the home that they were approaching has been abandoned for a while, although still an elder man's home. Moments later, Jenny comes over to my grandmother's house. She was going to ask me if I wanted to play, as we did every day. Jenny noticed the concerned looks on my face in the direction of the home and asked me, "What's going on?" I told her about the 2 men that had gotten out of the unfamiliar car and how they went up to the presumably abandoned home. Jenny then went on to explain to me that the man who lived there was currently in the hospital and was having health problems. As I said, the neighbors were all pretty close and aware of each other. Jenny and I then ran into my grandmother's house and grabbed some paper and pen and wrote the license plate of the strange car. After we did so, we were becoming increasingly curious As we were as kids and became trying to see where the men exactly went, we got closer to the home and we believed they were ransacking, and that's when one of the men spots us. We booked it, and being the unknowing and immature kids we were, we giggled and laughed for some reason that I don't even understand. In front of my grandmother's house, there are two big narrow vertical bush-like trees. Jenny and I, being curious and immature, hid behind these as we continued giggling. I'm honestly not sure why we didn't just go inside my grandmother's home, as the door was actually before the bushes. But we were curious, I guess. We peered our head out, trying to see where the men were, and that's when we saw that they have gotten in their car. They were now both scanning almost every inch of the area as they were driving back up the street. Only looking back at this, I feel like at this moment, we were in danger. For some reason, we didn't feel like we were in danger and continued giggling. The men left after this and never returned. The men were obviously taken off guard, and I'm honestly still 100% sure that what they were doing, or why they seemed like they were scanning the area. My only two guesses on why is either they were looking for us, or looking to make sure other people didn't see this. I'm really not sure. They clearly didn't like the fact that two 10-year-olds had noticed whatever it was they were doing. Jenny and I gave some surrounding neighbors the license plate we wrote down and alerted them about what happened. I don't think they took us serious. Those dudes who are up to no good in the neighborhood, let's not meet again, please.
This is actually two stories in one. The main story happened less than 20 minutes ago at about midnight. I was out doing some late night fishing at a small but deep hole on the side of a state road near my house. Every time I fish here at night by myself, I worry about what would happen, what I would do if someone were to pull over next to me. But it has never happened until now. Quick detour for the second story. I wasn't like this. I used to fish by myself in the middle of the night all the time and without a care in the world. But there was one night about 10 years ago, which perhaps merits its own post, but I will slide it in here and include it in the story anyways. It was where I was fishing off a seawall next to a bridge, and a car pulls over next to me. Two young men, but older than I was at that time, got out. They walked up to me casually and asked if I was catching anything. I told them no, not really, and I wasn't at all suspicious of them. I thought they were just going to fish and just thought that they would ask if I was having any luck or not before pulling their gear out. The bridge was a popular fishing spot, and I was sitting on the cement seawall with my feet dangling over the edge. One of the men suddenly shoves me off the seawall into the water. They both grab my fishing gear and take off in their car. The fall was only about 7 feet or so, which is a complete guess, but it was enough that I couldn't lift myself out of the water and up the cement wall. I had to swim around to where the water was more shallow so that I could climb up the wall. My mom had dropped me off that night, and I was supposed to call her to come pick me up later in the night. My cell phone had gotten wet and would not work, and to make matters worse, I was a smoker at that time, going on 2 years without smoking or any other form of nicotine, and my cigarettes had also gotten wet. And as you can imagine, I really needed a cigarette. I did not know what to do except to just sit there until eventually my mom drove up randomly. She was furious until I explained what happened. I shudder when I think about how I, or anybody else that they did this to, could have died. These people had no idea whether or not I knew how to swim. I was and am a very strong swimmer, and apparently they did not care. If they had seen on the news the next day that I had drowned under that bridge, would they put two and two together? Would they even care? Even if you assume everybody is a strong swimmer, the person could hit their head. There were many rocks under the seawall, and the person could be unconscious. And for what? $50 of cheap fishing gear? Anyways, clearly, ever since this night, 10 years ago, I've been much more cautious when I am alone at night, but especially when I am fishing alone at night. So, back to what actually happened tonight, which triggered me to write this post. I had luckily just finished up and loaded my car back up with all of my gear. I was actually sitting in my car and making an Instagram post showing the fish I caught. It was a couple of yellow bullhead catfish and some bluegill. I was trying to quickly write the post and then head home, so I was deep into the world of my phone and not really paying attention to anything else. Something causes me to look up and out my driver's side window, and there's this pickup truck sitting there that I did not even hear pull up. It's one of those big steel frame structures around the bed of the truck. I don't know what they're called, but I associate them with hunters or trappers. I have no idea whatsoever if that's an accurate association or not, but I do feel like I have seen them, or something similar, holding kennels with hunting dogs, so maybe that's where I got the idea. There is this very stereotypical, chubby redneck mullet type of guy looking in my window at me and smiling a very creepy smile. He was the passenger, and I did not or could not look past him to the driver. I have no idea how long they were sitting there. I very quickly debated winding my window down and asking what they wanted, but settled on putting my car into drive, driving around their truck and down the street. I was so freaked out that I did not immediately go home. I went somewhere else and pulled over, looking around to see if they were anywhere to be seen. And then I actually went back to the fishing spot to see if they were still sitting there or not. I did not pull over, I just drove by, and they were not there. It will drive me crazy wondering why they pulled over. Did they have something bad planned? Were they just curious? Wanted to help? Will I ever have to worry about seeing them around town after driving off on them like that? I realized that my reaction is not completely fair. They could have been pulling over to fish, although you've got to realize how small this fishing hole is. It is a literal fishing hole on the side of the road. It's probably about the size of a dining room or something. They could have been pulling over to see if I needed help. Who knows? All I know is that I was thinking that if I wind the window down to find out what they want, I could end up with a gun in my face for all I know. Then, I could not get a chance to drive off. So, I drove off without acknowledging them in any way so that I did not miss my chance. Even now, I worry about the fact that my car has some slightly identifying marks. Nothing crazy noticeable, but just some small stickers in the window. And if I piss them off by driving off like that, and if they live around here, what if my wife meets up with them sometime? What if she has my daughter with her? Am I paranoid? I am still a little freaked out.
This happened a couple years ago, and while not the scariest situation, it was definitely creepy. I was on my way back to work and decided to stop by the mall first to pick up some things I needed. As I was walking to my destination, I heard a voice behind me say, "Hello, Megan, how are you?" I turned out expecting to see someone I knew, but was surprised to see a tall man I've never seen before smiling at me. He said, "Hey, Megan," again, and I sputtered a meek, "Hi," and kept walking. I thought maybe he said ma'am, and I just misheard it, so I ignored it and keep walking to my destination. Once I get to the store, I notice he's still behind me and he enters the store with me. My gut is telling me this is not normal, but I try once more to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm looking through a rack of clothes when I look up and I see him looking around the store as if he's looking for someone. I'm 5'1", so I do well to hide in stores with racks and clothes, so I just grabbed what I wanted and walked to the front to pay. I looked up again and he was standing right by me and staring. The cashier and I shared awkward glances and I paid and walked out with this man right on my tail. So I got fed up and turned to him and said, "What the hell do you want?" He then said, "You," and just walked away. So I walked to my car the whole time looking over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't nearby. And once I was inside my car, I pulled out my phone to call my dad and noticed I had a Facebook notification, which was a friend request from this stranger. I called my dad, who said to check my Bluetooth AirDrop to see if it's on, and if it wasn't, because I never used Bluetooth. I look out my car window and see this guy looking around the parking lot and looking in car windows. I tell my dad, he tells me to just go, so I did. I blocked this guy on Facebook and haven't seen or heard from this man again. I hope I never do.
In 2008, I was driving from New Orleans, LA to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, a 22-year-old female, and my year-old pit bull in a 14-feet U-Haul truck with everything I own crammed into the back, a fancy flip phone, and my printout of MapQuest directions. I think the first smartphones actually came out around that time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was also much spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized that I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just when I'm starting to freak out and seriously run out of gas, I see a small town coming up. I pull into this town, and it is tiny. I was so worried about other things that I never did pay attention to the name of the town, but there were only about 6 streets in the whole place. I go gas up, and I'm ready to get back on the road. Except I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circle the town about 4 times and start getting so frustrated because this is such a tiny town, and how the hell can I not find my way out? I can literally see the highway, but I can't get to it. I return to the gas station to ask for directions. Now, when I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went in. When I enter for directions, there's a skinny, nondescript guy who has black hair hanging down in front of his eyes that looks like it could use a good wash. He isn't particularly creepy, but a little rude. He never really met my eyes, and he was looking down at the magazine. He gives me directions that doesn't sound right at all. He's telling me to take a road that will get me to the highway in about 17 miles. For a moment, I was dumbfounded. Then I point out that I didn't drive that far to get from the highway into town. So, why so far to get back to the highway? I can literally see it from the town. He is so casual, almost like I'm just an annoyance, and can follow his directions or not. Why should he care? He gives me some explanation about the road curving around that doesn't really make sense, and he still doesn't look at me. Just whatever, I gave you your directions, and waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently, and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. I get into the truck, and as soon as I put the key into the ignition, I burst into tears. I had the most terrible feeling that no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I didn't know what, but I knew right then and there that there was no way I was going to follow his directions. Yet, this was the only store in this little town, and short of knocking on doors, which is a no thank you, there was no one else to ask for directions. I decided that I didn't give a shit if this town seemed like something dropped out of a Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I found my way out, even if it took all damn night. Then, a big red beater of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulls up and disgorged the quintessential Texan man, huge, husky, and in flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jumped out of the truck and approached him quickly, yet warily. Looking into his eyes, I saw a kind human being, or at least I was hoping I did. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. I told him that I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned as I was visibly upset, so he made me laugh and very cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curve turn off right at the end of a small concrete tunnel that I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was so hard to see that they need to put up signs. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how far in miles was it back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. What happens if I drive? And I gave him the directions that the man in the store had given me. Texas looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out and usually only locals knew about it, so I told him. He was quiet for a few minutes and then asked what the attendant looked like and if I had a map of the state. Nope, just my MapQuest, which wasn't helpful in this situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box. Spreading it out for me, he traces the route I describe. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town and away from the interstate and led to seemingly the middle of nowhere. Texas told me that the road did go about 17 miles, right before it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there, and he told me that it was nothing but some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, and alcoholics, and these were the nice things townspeople had to say about them. And the erstwhile clerk was part of this family and also lived down that road. I will never forget the look in that man's eyes as he told me this. He told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts, and he told me to be careful traveling out there. I don't know if the man from the gas station wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul or what was in the driver's seat, but thankfully, I didn't have to find out. Oh, and I learned that sometimes angels look like ruddy-haired Texans with scruffy faces and rusty pickups. Thank you, random Texan stranger. You really saved my ass, and I will always remember you with tons of love. Sorry if I didn't ask your name. You are forever Texas to me now. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Ralph, Tasha, Fire05, Gabriel, Eskimono, Silver Threads, Sevenfold, Moschino. Thank you very, very much for your support. I really appreciate it. On too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.